the rhythm of the earth. The night is still. A faint hum lingers in the air, the kind that only exists when everything else has gone quiet. The wind outside barely moves, brushing against the window like the slow breath of an old world. You can almost hear the earth itself resting beneath you, heavy, patient, timeless. Tonight, we wander into that silence, into a world that once lived just below the surface. Not a world of kings or empires, not of battles or triumphs, but of soil, roots, and the quiet persistence of life. Beneath every field, beneath every worn pair of hands, there was a language that did not need words. The earth spoke through texture, through moisture, through the rhythm of growth. Centuries ago, medieval farmers listened to that rhythm every day. Their lives were bound not to the clock, but to the soil, to rain and frost, to sun and shadow. They worked the land not for wealth or glory, but simply to live. And the plants that grew under their care were humble and strong, born from patience and necessity. Some of those plants have long disappeared from our kitchens, their names fading like the ink of an old manuscript. Yet for hundreds of years they fed families, healed wounds, and colored the days of a world without haste. Tonight, as you settle into the quiet, we'll follow those forgotten roots, not through facts or lessons, but through feeling. The goal is not to remember every name or to trace every history. You don't have to understand it all, you only have to listen. Imagine the fields before dawn. The air is cold and damp, the soil dark and rich. A farmer walks slowly between the rows, his breath a small cloud in the dim light. He bends, digs gently, and lifts from the ground a cluster of pale roots. The sound is soft, a faint crack of earth giving way. There is no rush. There never was. In his world, time moved differently. These were the foods of that world, small, earthy, persistent. Vegetables that asked for little and gave back quietly. Skirret, good King Henry, salsify, Alexander's, and others, now almost forgotten. Each one carried the flavor of endurance, the taste of a season lived fully. They were not cultivated for beauty or profit, but because they survived, because they returned each year, even when the harvest was thin. To listen to their story is to listen to the heartbeat of the land itself. It is slow, steady, deliberate, a rhythm that human life once followed without question. In the medieval night, the fields would hum with that rhythm. Lanterns flickered in cottages. Soup simmered in clay pots. And outside, under layers of fog, the earth kept breathing. So as you drift further into the stillness, let that rhythm guide you. Let the sound of the soil, unseen and unhurried, carry your thoughts away from the noise of the present. There is nothing to analyze, nothing to solve, only the quiet remembrance of what once grew here. Roots tangled in time, stories buried in sleep, and the calm certainty that even in darkness, life continues beneath the surface. Close your eyes. The world above fades, and the one beneath begins to whisper. The rhythm of the earth remains. The world beneath, the forgotten roots. Skirret, the sweet root of damp fields. Before the potato ever reached Europe, there was another root that carried the quiet sweetness of the land. Skirret. Its name, once spoken in monastery gardens and small village kitchens, now drifts almost unheard through time. But centuries ago, skirret was a trusted companion of the soil. It grew where the ground stayed cool and damp, in the kind of earth that remembered rain. In the cloister gardens of medieval monasteries, monks tended rows of skirret beside leeks, onions, and herbs. They cultivated it not for commerce, but for sustenance. Its Latin name, Sium cicerum, appeared in herbals and healing manuscripts as a root of both nourishment and comfort. When the days grew short and frost settled into the ground, skirret was one of the few vegetables that remained alive, waiting quietly beneath the frozen soil. Its form was modest, thin white roots gathered in clusters, like the fingers of a hand reaching into the dark. Each root was no thicker than a pencil, pale and slightly curved, holding within it a delicate sweetness. When peeled and boiled, it turned tender, its flavor somewhere between a carrot and a chestnut, with a soft, nutty scent that rose like steam from warm earth. When roasted, it took on a golden hue and a gentle crispness. In those quiet kitchens of stone and smoke, the smell of skirret often mingled with garlic, parsley, or a bit of butter churned fresh that morning. What made it precious was not extravagance, but endurance. Skirret was a perennial. Once planted, it returned year after year, even when other crops failed. It did not demand rich soil or constant care. It asked only to be left in the cool earth, where its roots could thicken slowly through the seasons. For the medieval farmer, this was no small blessing. Life was unpredictable. Harvests came and went, but skirret remained. In that way, it became a quiet symbol of resilience, of the people who worked the land, not with pride or haste, but with patience. They knew that survival was not about strength or abundance, but about returning, again and again, to the same piece of soil, trusting it to give what it could. Skirret shared that nature. It did not grow to impress, it grew to persist. Imagine an early morning in a medieval village. The fields are damp with mist. A farmer bends to the ground, his breath a faint cloud in the cold air. He grips the stalks near their base and pulls gently. The soil loosens with a soft sound and the roots emerge, pale, tangled, shining with moisture. He wipes them clean against his sleeve, tucks them into a basket, and carries them back toward the light of his cottage. Inside, the fire crackles. The pot on the hearth steams quietly. The day will be long, but for now there is warmth and food and the steady rhythm of work that never truly ends. In the great houses of nobles and kings, skirret also had its place. Records suggest that it appeared in royal gardens, even in the notes of Henry VIII's gardener. It was considered refined enough for banquets, yet humble enough for peasants. Its sweetness could be shaped to many purposes, boiled into soups, mashed into creamy paste, or even candied with honey and baked into small tarts. But while the wealthy praised its taste, the poor cherished its faithfulness. Skirret did not belong to luxury, it belonged to time. As centuries passed, the arrival of the potato changed everything. The new crop was hardier, easier to peel, and produced in greater quantity. Skirret, with its delicate clustered roots, slowly vanished from fields and tables alike. By the 18th century, it had nearly disappeared from cultivation, its memory preserved only in old herbal texts and the faint echo of its name in forgotten recipes. And yet, something about it endures, perhaps not in gardens, but in spirit. Skirret reminds us of a rhythm older than progress, the patience of growth, the quiet generosity of the earth, and the humble strength of those who never stopped tending it. It is said that if you find one growing wild, its taste is faintly sweet, like something half remembered. Peel it, roast it, and you can almost sense the centuries lifting. The smoke, the mist, the steady hands of those who came before. In its small, twisting roots lies a lesson that not everything of value survives by being grand. Some things endure by staying close to the ground, by holding their sweetness in silence, waiting beneath the frost for spring to come again. The skirret never sought attention, never ruled a field, but it endured, gentle, persistent, and true. Just like the farmers who once bent over the soil, trusting the earth to give enough for one more day. Good King Henry, the poor man's asparagus. Along the stone walls of forgotten villages where the soil turned thin and stubborn, a small green plant once grew, quietly, faithfully, year after year. It didn't need tending, it didn't need praise. It simply rose from the cracks and corners of hard ground, feeding those who had little else. They called it Good King Henry. It was never a royal plant, though its name might suggest so. No one really knows how it came to be called that. Some say it was named after an old folk spirit who guarded the fields and hearths, a friendly spirit of the soil. Others think it came from an old word meaning home ruler, something that belonged to the household and looked after it. Whatever the origin, Good King Henry ruled not over palaces but over garden edges, cottage walls, and the humble hearts of those who needed it most. In the lean months after winter, when fields were still bare and the last stored roots had grown soft and wrinkled, this plant appeared. Its shoots broke through the frost, thick and green, stretching toward the pale spring light. For medieval families, that sight meant renewal, the promise of something fresh to eat after months of preserved grain and salted food. The young shoots were the most prized. Tender, slightly bitter, with a flavor between spinach and asparagus, they were among the first fresh vegetables of the year. People would pick them early in the morning before the sun grew strong and boil them gently in salted water. Some would serve them with butter, others stir them into pottages and simple broths. In richer homes, they might be paired with eggs or cheese. In poor cottages, they stood alone, seasoned only by salt and patience. As the plant matured, its leaves grew broad and triangular, darkening into a deeper green. The shoots toughened, but the leaves could still be harvested and cooked like spinach or kale, boiled down into stews or mashed with barley and peas. It wasn't delicate food, but it was nourishing, rich in iron and vitamins, giving strength to hands that worked the fields. Good King Henry thrived where little else would. It grew in poor soil, beside fences, near stables, along pathways worn by feet and time. It asked for nothing. No care, no tools, no trade. For the people who lived by the rhythm of weather and harvest, this made it a small miracle. It returned every year, even after hard winters, as if to remind them that survival was not only for the lucky or the rich, but also for the persistent. In an age when life was bound to the seasons, such plants were not mere food, they were lifelines. They connected people to the slow turning of the year, to the first warmth, the lengthening days, and the soft sound of running water after the ice melted. Eating Good King Henry was not just a meal, it was an act of trust in the earth's rhythm. But time, as it always does, changed everything. New vegetables arrived: spinach, chard, asparagus, cultivated, refined, and preferred for their milder flavor and predictable growth. Compared to them, Good King Henry seemed rough, coarse, and outdated. It took longer to germinate, its leaves were harder to clean, and its taste, once familiar, became strange to palates that had learned to expect softness and ease. By the 18th century, it had nearly vanished from gardens, yet for centuries before that, it was as essential as bread. Monks grew it in their kitchen gardens, peasants gathered it in the fields, and families passed it down through habit rather than name. It was not celebrated in feasts or written into royal menus, but it kept people alive, quietly, steadily, like a friend who never asked to be thanked. Imagine an early spring morning in the Middle Ages. The air is still cool, the sky pale with mist. A woman walks behind her cottage, basket in hand. The earth smells fresh again, the frost gone from the grass. She bends down and plucks a handful of green shoots, pushing up against the wall. Steam rises later from her pot. The smell of boiled greens, simple and real. Children dip bread into the broth. Outside, the first birds of spring begin to sing. That was good King Henry's world, not a world of fame or beauty, but of endurance. It lived at the edge of things, thriving in neglect, content to be overlooked as long as it could serve its purpose. Today, few remember its name. Fewer still have tasted it. But if you were to find it, growing wild beside a crumbling fence, you'd recognize something timeless in its leaves, the same quiet generosity that once kept whole families alive through the hardest months. In its simplicity, good King Henry carries a message that resilience can grow anywhere, even in the poorest soil, and that the earth always finds a way to give back to those who wait for it. It was never the king of gardens, but it was the king of survival. Green, humble, and steadfast, ruling silently from the edge of the field. Salsify, the oyster of the garden. In the quiet corners of medieval gardens, when the air had turned cold and the last green leaves had faded, there was still one root left beneath the soil, long, slender, and waiting for frost. Its skin was rough, brown and hairy, easy to overlook, yet inside it held something soft and tender. The people who grew it called it salsify, though some named it the oyster plant, for its faintly briny flavor that reminded them of the sea, a sea that most would never see. Salsify was not a crop for the impatient. It grew slowly, stretching its thin roots deep into the cool earth through spring and summer, taking its time to gather sweetness. The farmers knew better than to pull it early. They waited until after the first frost, when the air had grown crisp and the mornings turned silver with mist. Only then, when the cold had kissed the ground, did the salsify become ready. Its flavor mellowed, its flesh creamy and fragrant. Harvesting it was an act of care. The roots were fragile and broke easily, so each one had to be lifted gently with a spade, loosened from the soil like a secret being unearthed. The farmer would shake off the dirt, line the roots in baskets, and carry them back to the kitchen, where warmth and the smell of smoke waited. Preparing salsify took patience too. Its outer skin clung tight and stained the hands, so it had to be peeled under water, washed carefully, and soaked in milk to keep it from turning brown. Once cleaned, it revealed a pale ivory flesh, soft, fibrous, and full of quiet promise. The cooks would boil it slowly in milk or broth, sometimes roast it with herbs and butter until it softened to something almost silken. When done right, it gave off a scent, faintly like oysters. Not strong, not salty, but gentle and earthy, as if the land itself had learned how to taste the sea. In a world without refrigeration, where food was bound to the seasons, salsify was a small luxury. Winter meals were often plain, grains, salted meat, or preserved vegetables. But a dish of salsify added a note of grace. Its mild flavor blended with onions, garlic, and thyme. Its creamy texture turned soups and stews into comfort. For families gathered around small fires during the coldest months, it was a reminder that gentleness could still grow in hard times. In monasteries, it was sometimes used in Lenten meals, simple yet nourishing, a root that carried the sweetness of patience. Monks would stew it slowly, letting it melt into broth with herbs from their cloister gardens. They saw in it a lesson of humility, a plant that gave only after enduring the frost, a flavor that rewarded waiting. Beyond the kitchen, salsify found a place in medicine. Herbalists believed its white sap had healing power, used for cleansing the liver, soothing fevers, even lifting melancholy. Old manuscripts spoke of its pure nature, calling it a root of balance and renewal. Whether those cures truly worked or not, the belief itself said much about how people saw the plant, not as grand or rare, but as quietly good. Still, despite its charm, salsify never became a staple. It took too long to grow, too much effort to clean, and too gentle a hand to harvest. When the potato arrived from the New World, hardy and yielding, salsify's delicate nature became its undoing. Farmers needed crops that could fill bellies quickly, not ones that demanded patience and care. Slowly, the oyster plant faded from the gardens and from memory, leaving behind only a whisper of its name in old cookbooks. Yet if you listen closely to the rhythm of those forgotten gardens, you can almost hear it. The sound of a spade turning soil on a frosty morning, the soft pull of roots from the earth, the hiss of milk boiling gently on a hearth. It is the sound of a world that understood time differently, where food was not just sustenance, but relationship, a conversation between human hands and the land. To eat salsify was to taste that conversation. It was not about bold flavors or abundance, but about stillness, the kind of stillness that comes from tending something slow, waiting through seasons, and finding beauty in the unhurried. Its sweetness was quiet, its scent almost shy. You had to lean close to notice it. Even now, a few heirloom gardeners still grow it. They know the secret, that beneath its rough skin lies something tender, almost fragile, something that rewards gentleness. When roasted with butter and thyme, it gives off a warmth that feels like memory, the taste of calm after effort, of light after long darkness. Salsify may have been forgotten by time, but its story remains. The story of patience, of care, and of the kind of nourishment that doesn't come quickly or easily. It asks for attention, for slow hands, and for the humility to wait. And when it's finally ready, when the cold has passed and the root yields to the knife, it gives you not just food, but a feeling that even in the hardest winter, the earth still remembers how to be kind. Scorzonera, the black skin, the golden heart. In the deep silence of the garden, long after the last summer flowers had faded, a dark root slept beneath the soil, rough, black, and uninviting to the eye. Its name was scorzonera, a word that came from Old Italian meaning black bark. To those who didn't know it, the plant looked almost wild, something to be pulled and discarded, but those who did knew better. Beneath that bark-like skin, hidden from sight, was a heart as pale as ivory and as soft as butter. Scorzonera was the kind of vegetable that asked for faith. You couldn't tell by looking at it what it would give. When dug from the ground, its root appeared gnarled, twisted, streaked with mud. But when washed and peeled, the transformation began. The dark outer layer gave way to tender white flesh that gleamed faintly in the light. Cooked gently, it became smooth and sweet, melting on the tongue like something that had remembered warmth even in the coldest months. In the Middle Ages, this strange-looking root had a reputation that stretched beyond the kitchen. Apothecaries prized it as a cure for venom and illness. It was known in some places as viper's herb, believed to draw poison from the blood and heal wounds caused by snakes. Dried and ground into powder, it found its way into tonics and tinctures prescribed by monks and healers for fevers, melancholy, or fatigue. To the people who gathered it, scorzonera was not only food but medicine, the earth's quiet answer to pain. It grew best in cool climates, thriving in the same kind of patient soil that demanded work but offered loyalty in return. Farmers would plant it in spring, knowing it would take its time, sending its roots deep and slow through the year. When frost finally came and the ground hardened, that was when they began to dig, because only the cold could bring out its sweetness. The first bite after boiling or roasting always carried that strange paradox, a root that looked like bitterness, yet tasted like calm. In the monasteries of Europe, where life followed the rhythm of prayer and the seasons, scorzonera appeared often in the monks' kitchens. It was boiled with herbs and grains, mashed into soups or baked in simple pies. The brothers saw it as a lesson in humility, beauty hidden within plainness, richness inside restraint. A reminder, perhaps, that what the eye overlooks may nourish the heart the most. In noble households, the same root took on a different character. It was served with honey and vinegar, paired with fish or game, even candied as a delicacy for winter banquets. In those kitchens where luxury was measured in color and spice, the soft white of scorzonera offered a rare kind of elegance, understated but impossible to forget. But time, as always, has little mercy for what requires patience. When the potato and carrot rose to dominance, fast-growing and easy to prepare, scorzonera was slowly pushed aside. Its thick black skin and fragile roots were seen as inconvenient. It did not yield enough nor quickly enough. The world began to favor abundance over subtlety, speed over care. And so the black root of the old gardens disappeared, its name lingering only in forgotten recipes and herbal manuscripts. Yet, for those who still grow it, a few gardeners, a few dreamers, scorzonera remains a quiet marvel. When they pull it from the ground, the same ritual unfolds: the dark soil, the peeling, the transformation. It is as if the earth still keeps a secret for anyone patient enough to ask. If you cook it today, roasted with butter or herbs, the taste is gentle, soothing, slightly sweet. There's something about it that feels ancient, as though it carries the memory of winters long gone, of fires burning low, of people finding comfort in simple things. Scorzonera's story is not one of grandeur or conquest. It is the story of hidden beauty, the kind that doesn't call attention to itself, that lives quietly under layers of roughness. It teaches that not all things worth keeping are bright or easy. Some are buried deep, waiting for the right hands to uncover them. In the black root with the golden heart, there is a truth that feels older than the soil itself, that the finest sweetness often wears a hard disguise, and that the most humble things, when tended with care, reveal a grace untouched by time. Even now, when you hold it in your hands, at the rough, dark root, the scent of earth still clinging to it, you might sense the echo of those who came before. Farmers, monks, cooks, healers. Each of them knew what it meant to look past the surface, to dig a little deeper, and to find warmth in the cold ground. Scorzonera was never meant to dazzle. It was meant to remind us that beauty, like kindness, often hides in plain sight, quiet, patient, and waiting beneath the skin. Alexander's the green of the sea. Long before the pale stalks of celery appeared on kitchen tables, there was another green, bold, tall and salt-tolerant, that thrived along the windy coasts of Europe. It was called Alexander's, known to monks and sailors, to farmers and cooks, as the vegetable that could survive where others could not. Its leaves were deep green and glossy, its stems hollow and strong, and when crushed, it released a scent that was both sharp and earthy, something between pepper and celery, with a hint of the sea. Alexander's was a plant of the shore. It grew where the soil turned white with salt and where the air carried the breath of waves. Along the edges of monasteries built near the coast, you could see it rising in thick clusters, almost as tall as a man, its flowers blooming in small yellow umbels that caught the light. To the medieval gardener, it was a blessing, easy to grow, generous in yield, and useful in every part. The Romans had brought it north centuries earlier, carrying its seeds across the sea to Britain and beyond. They valued it as both food and medicine, planting it beside temples and along roadsides, where it grew freely, spreading wherever human hands disturbed the soil. Its Latin name, Smyrnium olusatrum, spoke of strength and fragrance. For them, Alexander's was not a delicacy, but a reliable companion. One of the first greens to appear in early spring, when winter's stores were nearly gone. Every part of it could be eaten. The young leaves were chopped into stews or tossed into broth, their taste sharp and spicy. The stems, when blanched, softened into something tender and aromatic, eaten like asparagus with a drizzle of oil or melted butter. The roots, roasted or boiled, were earthy and sweet. Even the seeds, dried and ground, served as a kind of poor man's pepper, adding warmth to dishes. Long before imported spices became common, nothing was wasted. In coastal monasteries, the monks cultivated Alexander's as one of their main herbs. It was hardy, self-seeding, and dependable, a plant that didn't ask for much, but always gave back. When the wind howled and the sea sprayed over the walls, the Alexanders still stood, their stalks bending but not breaking. To those who lived close to the edge of the world, it symbolized resilience. The flavor, though strong, was beloved for its depth. It carried the scent of the shore, that strange blend of salt, wind, and earth. In stews, it brightened dull ingredients. In soups, it offered body and warmth. The wealthy used it too, though often dressed with honey or vinegar, to tame its intensity. For a time, it was everywhere, in gardens of monasteries, in castle courtyards, and in the foraged baskets of peasants along the coast. But as the centuries turned, tastes began to change. Celery, once wild and bitter, was gradually tamed through cultivation. It offered what Alexander's could not: a milder, more predictable flavor, easier to grow inland, easier to shape for the refined palate of a new age. Celery's delicate crispness suited the elegance of emerging cuisine. Alexander's, too bold and too wild, began to fade. By the 18th century, it had nearly disappeared from the dinner tables of Europe. Gardeners stopped saving its seeds, cooks stopped mentioning it in their recipes. The once common plant was pushed back to the margins, growing untended along old walls beside sea cliffs and in forgotten fields where no one bothered to pull it up. Only there, in the company of salt air and gulls, did it continue its quiet life. Even now you can still find it if you know where to look, near the ruins of old monasteries or by coastal paths, standing tall with its deep green leaves and clusters of golden flowers. Crush one of its seeds between your fingers, and the scent of history rises, sharp, peppery, alive. There's something almost poetic in its story. Alexander's was never a plant of luxury or perfection. It was a plant of survival, of wind and patience, of strength shaped by the elements. It fed those who worked the land and those who prayed beside the sea. It taught that nourishment could come from what grows on the edge in places where the soil is poor, but the spirit is strong. When you taste Alexander's, if you ever do, you understand why people once loved it. Its flavor carries the echo of old kitchens, of ships at harbor, of monks stirring broth by candlelight. It is green with the memory of salt and time. Though celery may have taken its place, Alexander's left behind something deeper, a reminder that beauty and strength often grow where life is hardest. The plant may have been forgotten by markets, but not by the sea, whose wind still carries its scent. It remains what it always was. The green of the coast, the taste of endurance, the quiet proof that not everything wild needs to be tamed to be worth keeping. And so, among the salt-soaked stones and the singing gulls, the Alexander's still grows, tall, stubborn, and fragrant, a living relic of a world that once found its sweetness not in ease, but in resilience. Chervil root, the fragrance of the monastery. In the shaded corners of medieval monastery gardens, where silence was a kind of prayer, there grew a root so modest that few beyond those cloister walls ever knew its name. It was not tall or showy, its flowers were small, white, and easily lost among the herbs. Yet below the surface, beneath careful soil tended by patient hands, the chervil root hid a quiet sweetness, a gentle perfume of nut and anise, soft as breath and lasting as memory. The monks who grew it called it Chervil bulbosum, though most simply knew it as chervil's humble cousin, a plant for those who had learned to find beauty in restraint. It was a root that did not hurry. From seed to harvest, it asked for time, long, deliberate months of waiting, while its thin green leaves reached upward and its slender roots grew slowly in the cool, damp soil. The monks understood this rhythm. They too lived by seasons, not by haste. Chervil root was never the star of the garden. Around it grew bolder companions, garlic, onions, lovage, leeks. But the monks knew its value. When lifted from the soil at the turn of winter, its brown skin hid a creamy flesh that softened in cooking to a flavor delicate and layered, part chestnut, part sweet potato, with a faint note of anise that lingered like incense after prayer. The kitchens of the monastery were simple, built for nourishment, not indulgence. Yet they had their quiet artistry. In the cool stone rooms where fire crackled softly beneath iron pots, chervil roots were boiled, mashed, or roasted with butter and herbs from the same garden. Their taste was never loud, but it was warm, the kind of flavor that asked you to slow down, to pay attention, to listen. For the monks, growing chervil root was more than an act of sustenance. It was a meditation. Each plant demanded patience. The seeds were small and slow to germinate, sometimes taking weeks to sprout. The roots grew gently, preferring stillness over haste. They had to be planted in shaded beds, watered carefully, and left undisturbed until the earth decided they were ready. In a world where even time was sacred, this patience became part of the practice. When harvest came, it was a quiet ritual. The soil, dark and soft, was loosened by hand. The monks lifted each root with care, shaking away the earth as if revealing something entrusted to them. They gathered the roots in woven baskets, their scent faint but comforting, a mix of anise, sweetness, and damp ground. In the refectory, where meals were eaten in silence, the chervil root appeared often in winter stews and pottages. It thickened broths, softened grains, and added a mild sweetness that seemed to echo the rhythm of monastic life itself, humble, consistent, and full of hidden grace. For those who lived within stone walls, away from the noise of the world, it was a reminder that gentleness could be as sustaining as strength. Outside the monastery, few people cultivated it. It was too slow, too subtle, and too fragile for the larger fields where peasants needed food that grew fast and filled the stomach. The chervil root asked for care, the kind of attention that only comes from those who see work as devotion. So it remained a monastic treasure, shared sometimes with travelers or the sick who came to the abbey gates. In herbal medicine, it was valued as a plant of calm. Healers described it as cleansing, soothing to the stomach, and good for the blood. Its mild sweetness was said to restore the body's balance after illness or fasting. To the monks who believed that food and spirit were bound by the same thread, the chervil root's gentle nature made it a perfect expression of temperance, nourishment without excess, flavor without pride. There is something profoundly symbolic in the way it grew. Beneath the earth, unseen, it developed quietly. No rush, no struggle for attention. Above, its feathery leaves trembled in the wind, delicate but enduring. It was as if the plant itself embodied the virtues the monks tried to live by: patience, humility, gentleness. In tending it, they practiced those virtues daily. As the centuries passed, the chervil root began to fade from memory. When trade routes brought spices and exotic vegetables to Europe, its quiet sweetness was overshadowed. People wanted bold flavors, colors, and abundance. The old monastic herbs, lovage, alexanders, skirret, and chervil root, were pushed aside, their seeds forgotten in dusty drawers. Yet even now, in some forgotten gardens or in the hands of those who love heirloom plants, chervil root still grows. It has not changed. It still asks for time, still offers gentleness to those who wait. When roasted, its aroma fills the kitchen with something ancient, a fragrance that seems to come not just from the earth, but from patience itself. If you taste it, you understand why the monks cherished it. Its sweetness is not the sweetness of sugar, but of calm. It lingers softly, fading like a hymn at dusk. It reminds you that not all nourishment is meant to excite. Some is meant to restore. The chervil root is a lesson written in soil, that beauty can be quiet, that kindness can grow slowly, and that even the smallest root, when tended with care, can carry the warmth of an entire season. In the stillness of the monastery garden, where the bells marked the hours and the wind carried the scent of time and rain, the chervil root waited underground, patient, hidden, certain. And when at last it was lifted from the earth, it gave back what the monks had given it: tenderness, peace, and the soft, enduring fragrance of devotion. The vegetables of wind and sea. Sea kale, the coastal vegetable of spring. Along the cold and restless coasts of medieval Europe, where the land met the salt and wind of the sea, there grew a plant that few dared to cultivate, but many quietly cherished. Its name was sea kale, and it belonged to both worlds, part of the earth, part of the shore. It grew where the soil was thin, where salt water sometimes kissed the roots, and where few other greens could survive. It was the first sign that winter's grip was loosening. When the snow melted and the wind began to soften, small ivory shoots pushed through the sand. These were the young stems of sea kale, pale from being blanched under mounds of soil or covered by clay pots to protect them from the harsh light. Tender, crisp, and delicately flavored, they were unlike anything else the cold months had to offer. To those who lived by the coast, these shoots were not just food. They were a promise. The people who gathered sea kale knew the rhythm of the tides and the patience of the seasons. They understood that this plant, Crambe maritima, needed time and a particular kind of land: loose, sandy soil near the dunes, kissed by sea spray but not drowned by it. Too far inland, it withered. Too close to the waves, it drowned. But in that narrow margin between the two, in that fragile balance of salt and soil, it thrived. In the earliest days of spring, when food stores were nearly empty and green life was still scarce, the first shoots of sea kale appeared like a quiet celebration. Pale white, almost translucent, they looked fragile but tasted alive, something between cabbage and asparagus, with a faint hint of the ocean. Boiled briefly and served with butter or herbs, they offered both nourishment and relief. For coastal families, sea kale was the vegetable of hope. It told them the worst was over. The storms would soon pass, the fish would return to the nets, and the fields inland would soon be ready for planting. The first bite of sea kale was not just flavor, it was a kind of reassurance that life still moved forward, even after the hardest winters. In fishing villages, the gathering of sea kale became a seasonal ritual. Families would walk along the dunes with baskets, carefully cutting the shoots so the plant would return next year. They treated it not as a weed, but as a gift, something that belonged to the rhythm of the shore. When they brought it home, the smell of salt and wet sand still clung to its leaves. Boiled, steamed, or baked with a little oil and bread, it became the first fresh green of the year, breaking months of dried grains and salted fish. In the monastic gardens near the sea, monks tried to cultivate it deliberately, building raised beds filled with sandy soil to mimic the coast. They saw it as a symbol of renewal, a humble but sacred sign that the earth was ready to begin again. In the quiet of early spring, they would blanch the shoots under pots, waiting for them to pale and sweeten. When harvested, the monks would serve them alongside simple meals, fish, bread, and herbs, grateful for the reminder that patience bore fruit, even in the harshest landscapes. The taste of sea kale was never extravagant. It didn't announce itself with spice or color. Its pleasure was in its simplicity. Soft, buttery, slightly briny, and fleeting. It came and went with the season, gone by the time the land turned green with summer crops. That brevity only made it more precious. It was also a plant of resilience. While others struggled against salt and wind, sea kale drew strength from them. Its thick leaves stored water against drought, and its deep roots anchored it through storms. To those who lived along the cliffs and coves, it was a teacher in endurance. Proof that beauty could come from hardship, that tenderness could grow from the roughest earth. In the centuries that followed, as agriculture moved inland and trade brought exotic foods from far away, sea kale began to fade from memory. Celery, asparagus, and cabbage took its place on the tables of both peasants and nobles. Yet, in a few corners of the coast, it continued to grow wild, its silvery blue leaves catching the light like the sea itself. Even now, if you walk along the British shores in early spring, you might see it, clusters of broad, waxy leaves rising from the sand, pale shoots hidden beneath. The air will smell faintly of salt and cold earth, and if you dig carefully, you might find the young stems ready to eat, just as they were centuries ago. Cook them simply, as they once did, steamed, with a touch of butter and a pinch of sea salt. Taste the faint sweetness, the echo of cabbage, the whisper of asparagus. And in that moment, you'll understand why it mattered so much, not for its richness, but for its timing. It arrived when the world was still grey and bare, when people needed a sign that life was returning. Sea kale was never just food, it was a message written in green and white across the coast, a soft declaration from the land and sea that winter had ended. It carried with it the scent of renewal, the taste of calm, and the quiet joy of beginning again. And so, year after year, beneath wind and salt, it continues its patient work, breaking through the cold sand, offering its pale shoots to anyone still watching the horizon for spring. Horseradish, the fiery root of vitality. Beneath the heavy soil of medieval gardens where frost lingered and the air smelled faintly of smoke and salt, there grew a root that did not wait for warmth to show its strength. It was horseradish, pale, pungent, and alive with fire. To those who dug it up with numb fingers in the cold months, It was more than a seasoning. It was a spark in the greyness, a reminder that the earth itself still carried heat. The first bite of horseradish was always a shock. Sharp enough to bring tears to the eyes, quick enough to wake even the sleepiest heart. In an age before chili peppers or wasabi ever reached Europe, horseradish was the only plant that could deliver true heat. Grated raw, it released a fierce aroma that filled the kitchen and burned at the back of the throat. But once mixed with vinegar or cream, that fire softened, turning into warmth that spread through the chest and lingered long after the meal. In the Middle Ages, horseradish was valued for this strange duality, harsh yet healing, wild yet dependable. It was a winter root, a survivor of cold soil and hard weather. Even when snow blanketed the fields, it waited below, ready to be unearthed. Farmers planted it once and rarely needed to tend it again. Its thick, white roots spread deep into the ground, sending out new shoots year after year. No matter how many times you harvested it, it always found its way back. Stubborn, persistent, alive. On cold evenings, when preserved meats and salted fish filled the tables, horseradish was the companion that made such food bearable. Its heat cut through the heaviness of pork and beef, bringing life back to dishes that had spent months in storage. A simple spoonful of grated horseradish mixed with vinegar or mustard could turn a bland meal into something vibrant. It didn't just season food, it awakened it. In coastal towns, it was served with pickled herring or smoked eel, its sharpness balancing the oil and salt of the sea. Inland, it appeared beside roasts and stews, often as a paste or relish. In wealthier kitchens, cooks would mix it with honey or cream to temper its bite, creating sauces for meats and fish. In humbler homes, it was eaten raw, the fiery taste cleansing the palate and the body alike. But beyond its flavor, horseradish carried a kind of folklore. Herbalists praised it as a plant of vitality. Monks wrote of its power to stir the blood and banish dullness. It was thought to strengthen the heart, clear the lungs, and drive away winter's sluggishness. Some even steeped it in wine or vinegar to make tonics against colds and aches. In an age when medicine was as much faith as science, the root's sting was proof enough of its strength. It burned, and so it healed. The plant itself matched its nature. Once rooted, it was almost impossible to remove. Its roots burrowed deep, and even a small piece left behind could grow into a new plant by spring. Farmers often joked that horseradish chose its own ground. You didn't plant it so much as invite it, and once it accepted, it stayed. In that way, it was a living symbol of endurance, rough, persistent, and alive with energy. In the colder months, when the world fell to sleep, horseradish was like a breath of defiance. It didn't offer sweetness or comfort, it offered strength. It reminded people that the body could still feel, that warmth could come from within, that even in the dull quiet of winter, there was still motion, fire, and breath. Its leaves, broad and green, were sometimes used as wraps or poultices, believed to draw out pain from sore muscles or joints. Its scent, sharp and cleansing, filled storerooms and kitchens, cutting through the mustiness of preserved food. Even the act of grating it became a small ritual, eyes watering, nose stinging, laughter between coughs. It hurt, but it was a good kind of hurt, the kind that reminded you that you were alive. Over time, horseradish became part of feasts and traditions. In Central Europe, it was placed on spring tables as winter ended, a symbol of renewal and strength, the fiery root that had endured the frost and emerged again. People ate it not just for taste, but for meaning. To bite into its heat was to welcome vitality back into the year. Even now, centuries later, horseradish carries that same ancient energy. Whether grated fresh beside a roast or stirred into a sauce, it still brings its unmistakable fire, that rush of life that clears the air and stirs the blood. It is, at heart, a plant that does not yield. It grows where it pleases, returns no matter how harsh the season, and reminds us, through tears and warmth, that resilience can burn quietly beneath the cold. Horseradish is not gentle, but it is honest. Its flavor doesn't hide or flatter. It bites, it cleanses, it wakes. And in that boldness lies its beauty. The fierce breath of winter itself, turned into something you can taste, something that burns not to harm, but to keep you alive. Parsley, the blend of two worlds. In the gardens of medieval Europe, where every plant was grown for a reason, to feed, to heal, or to comfort, there once thrived a quiet hybrid called parsley. It was neither entirely parsley nor celery, but something between the two, a bridge of fragrance and flavor born from chance and patience. Its leaves carried the freshness of parsley, while its stems held the crisp bite of young celery. Together they formed a plant that was both familiar and strange, a soft harmony between two worlds of green. Farmers and monks alike appreciated this blend. They called it the herb of two tempers because it balanced delicacy with strength. In the monastic gardens, parsley grew alongside leeks, onions, and sage, not as a rare treasure, but as a daily companion. Its deep green leaves added brightness to stews and broths, while its stems were tossed into pots of porridge or lentils to bring a subtle crunch. In peasant cottages, where meals were simple and ingredients few, parsley turned plain food into comfort. Its aroma was gentle but distinct. When freshly cut, it carried the clean, slightly peppery scent of parsley, mixed with the earthy, herbal tone of celery. A handful thrown into a pot could change everything, softening bitterness, enhancing sweetness, and bringing balance to the meal. Mothers often taught their children to recognize it by touch. "Parsley whispers," they would say, but parsley hums. Every part of the plant was useful. The tender leaves, flavored soups and boiled grains. The stems, though thinner than celery, were chewed raw by farmers in the fields, crisp, watery, and refreshing after a day of labor. The seeds were collected, dried, and used in infusions thought to ease digestion or relieve water retention. Even the roots were sometimes boiled in broth, adding a faint sweetness that mellowed stronger ingredients like garlic or turnip. But beyond its flavor, parsley carried a quiet symbolism. In many small villages, it represented balance, the meeting of opposites that formed something better. To the monks who tended their gardens with steady patience, parsley was a lesson in harmony, that the world's gifts need not be grand to be good, and that beauty often lies in the blending, not the extremes. In the countryside, where spices from distant lands were luxuries few could afford, parsley became a small miracle. Just a few sprigs could lend depth to a stew or freshness to a humble barley soup. It was the seasoning of the poor, and yet it carried the grace of the rich. An herb that elevated without boasting. Travelers and pilgrims passing through monasteries often found it in their meals, the taste faint but comforting, as if it belonged to no one place but every table. Medical texts from the time describe parsley as a warming herb, cleansing and kind to the stomach. Herbalists recommended it to stimulate appetite or ease heaviness after meals. Monks wrote of its soft spirit, neither too hot nor too cold, the perfect plant for moderation, a word that meant both health and virtue in their world. In a way, parsley was the herb of the middle path, modest and balanced, just as life in those cloisters was meant to be. And yet, even such a gentle companion could not withstand the march of progress. When cultivated celery arrived, taller, juicier, and more uniform, parsley began to fade. Celery's strong stems and predictable flavor made it easier to grow and sell. Parsley, with its delicate structure and slower growth, was left behind, surviving only in scattered rural gardens and half-forgotten recipes. By the 17th century, it had almost vanished, its name appearing only in old cookbooks or botanical lists kept by curious monks. But for those who once knew it, parsley was never just a plant. It was memory of simple meals shared, of quiet gardens after rain, of hands that worked the soil for sustenance, not profit. Its taste belonged to another rhythm of life, one slower, softer, more patient. If you could taste it now, you might understand why it mattered. The flavor would not overwhelm you. It would arrive gently, green, balanced, calm, and disappear just as softly, leaving behind a faint sweetness, a breath of something almost familiar. In a world that often praises intensity and perfection, parsley remains a forgotten teacher. It reminds us that harmony is not found in purity but in mixture, that two humble things, when joined, can create something quietly extraordinary. Somewhere in an old monastery garden, perhaps, a few seeds still sleep in the soil, waiting. If they ever sprout again, their leaves will still carry the same scent, and their stems will still hum with the same subtle life. And in their silence, they will remind us of a time when people listened closely to the language of plants, and when balance, not brilliance, was enough. Lovage, the tall herb of strong fragrance. At the far edge of every medieval garden, where the smaller herbs grew timidly under shade, one plant always stood taller, green, glossy, and almost regal. Its hollow stalks reached toward the light. Its scent filled the air before you even touched it. This was lovage, the giant of the herb world, bold in flavor and generous in spirit. Lovage was not a shy plant. Its leaves glistened with oils that released a sharp, spicy aroma somewhere between celery, parsley, and anise. To the medieval cook, it was both a blessing and a challenge. A handful of leaves could transform a plain pot of barley and onions into a rich, aromatic stew. Too much, and it would overpower the dish entirely. It demanded respect and restraint. The monks and farmers who grew lovage knew its power well. They used it the way others used salt or pepper, as a way to wake dull flavors, to stretch meager ingredients, and to bring warmth to winter meals. A single sprig could perfume a cauldron of soup. The stems, thick and fibrous, were sometimes hollowed out and used as natural stirring sticks, turning each pot into a fragrant vessel of green spice. In the peasant homes, where food was often simple and repetitive, lovage was an escape from monotony. The same vegetables, the same grains, the same salted meat, all came alive under its scent. Its leaves were chopped into broths, mixed into cheese, or steeped in hot water for a kind of herbal tea that soothed the stomach and cleared the head. In monastic kitchens, it became a quiet favorite. The monks, who believed that food should both nourish and heal, treated lovage as both herb and medicine. Its roots were dug up in autumn, thick and gnarled, and boiled into tonics to aid digestion. Its seeds were dried and ground for use in breads or liqueurs. Even its fragrance was considered curative, a warming air, as one old text described it, that restored the spirit in cold months. Lovage's presence in the garden was unmistakable. It grew as high as a man's shoulder, with strong, ribbed stems and leaves that gleamed darkly under the sun. Bees and butterflies loved it. The air around it always seemed alive. Once planted, it returned faithfully year after year, requiring little care. It was the kind of plant that belonged to old soil and steady hands. To the medieval imagination, lovage was a plant of energy, fiery, alive, and renewing. It was said to warm the blood, quicken the mind, and even sweeten the breath. Women sometimes tucked its leaves into their aprons as a natural perfume, and travelers chewed it on long journeys to stay alert. In an age without coffee or spices from distant lands, lovage was a small miracle of the earth, heat, vigor, and fragrance wrapped in green. But time has a way of humbling even the most vibrant plants. As the centuries turned and trade expanded, new flavors arrived from across the world: nutmeg, cinnamon, pepper, basil. Palates began to shift toward refinement and subtlety. What once felt warm and vital came to seem harsh and rustic. The very qualities that had made lovage beloved, its intensity, its assertiveness, became its downfall. By the 17th century, lovage had already begun to fade from most kitchens. Celery, its milder cousin, took its place. Easier to cultivate, easier to control, and gentler on the tongue. Lovage was pushed to the margins, surviving mostly in monastery gardens and among the poor who still appreciated its strength when others sought delicacy. Yet those who knew it never forgot. They spoke of its flavor as a memory, a taste of the past, earthy and real. In some rural corners of Europe, farmers still used it in broth or stew, letting its leaves simmer low and long until their sharpness melted into comfort. Its roots, dried and ground, were used in bitters and tonics, a reminder that the line between food and medicine had once been soft and intertwined. There's something about lovage that feels human, loud, enduring, impossible to ignore. It doesn't hide or whisper. It fills the air, demands space, makes itself known. And yet, beneath that strength, there's a deep generosity. It gives more than it takes, thriving without fuss, flavoring even the simplest of meals. It's the kind of plant that belonged to a world less afraid of intensity, when taste meant life, not luxury. If you crush its leaves today, that same old fragrance rises, a rush of green, pepper, and earth. It smells like a kitchen with a fire going, like the first steam lifting from a pot after a long day's work. It smells like endurance. Lovage may have slipped from our tables, but it has never truly left the soil. It waits in old gardens and forgotten corners, tall and steady as ever, reminding us that strength and flavor, once valued, are not easily erased. In its towering stalks and bold scent lives the memory of a different appetite, one shaped by hunger, survival, and gratitude. And perhaps that's why even centuries later, lovage still matters. It tells the story of a time when food was not about elegance, but about warmth, when a single plant could make an entire meal feel alive again. Wild plants, edge plants, survival plants. Fat hen, the gift that grows itself. There was once a plant that asked for nothing. It didn't need to be sown, watered, or tended. It grew wherever the earth was disturbed, at the edges of ploughed fields, beside fences, and between rows of more delicate crops. To the careful farmer, it might have looked like a weed. To the hungry and the humble, it was a quiet miracle. Its name was Fat Hen, or lamb's quarters, as some later called it, a green that grew freely and gave freely too. Its leaves were soft, triangular, and pale green, coated with a faint, silvery dust that shimmered slightly in the sun. When touched, they left a fine powder on the fingertips, a reminder of how the plant protected itself against dryness and heat. Beneath that powder lay a flavor mild and nutty, not unlike spinach, but with a touch of the wild, a taste that seemed to belong to open fields and wind. For the poor and the laboring, Fat Hen was both food and grace. It appeared uninvited, yet always at the right time, especially in early summer when stored grains ran low and gardens had not yet yielded their crops. Children could recognize it easily, plucking handfuls of leaves to bring home. The mothers would wash them in cool water, boil them into soups, or mash them with peas and barley. When seasoned with just a pinch of salt or a bit of fat, it became a meal. Simple, green, and full of life. The plant's generosity didn't end with its leaves. By the end of summer, Fat Hen produced thousands of tiny black seeds packed in clusters, each smaller than a grain of sand. They were surprisingly nutritious, rich in protein, iron, and fiber. When ground into flour, they could stretch a loaf of bread or thicken a porridge during lean times. In famine years, these seeds were sometimes the difference between hunger and survival. Because it grew without permission, Fat Hen was never a crop of prestige. It belonged to no one, and so it belonged to everyone. Medieval farmers often referred to it as a weed of mercy. It filled the spaces that cultivated plants left behind, offering abundance without asking for labor. It thrived in poor soil, near livestock pens and compost heaps where the ground was rich with life but ignored by planters. And so, while other vegetables demanded attention, Fat Hen simply appeared, a self-born offering from the earth. Herbalists of the time also found value in it. Old medical manuscripts mention Fat Hen as a gentle cleanser for the body. Its leaves were boiled into tonics to ease digestion, its seeds were believed to restore strength after illness, and crushed leaves were used as poultices for stings and sores. It was not an exotic cure or a noble remedy, just a quiet, reliable helper, like the people who lived close to the soil and depended on its every gift. In its modesty, Fat Hen became a symbol of freedom. It grew outside the boundaries of gardens, thriving where rules did not reach. It reminded those who gathered it that nature's kindness wasn't limited to the rich or the powerful. The earth, after all, gives to anyone who is willing to look closely enough. A child with a basket, an old woman with weary hands. Both could find a meal in the green shimmer of Fat Hen leaves. When agriculture became more organized and land was divided into strict plots, plants like Fat Hen began to vanish from respect. People called it a nuisance, a weed that competed with more valuable crops. The wild was pushed away for the orderly, the self-growing was replaced by the cultivated. Yet, even as fields became tidier, Fat Hen never truly disappeared. It found refuge along the margins, forgotten corners, under hedges, beside stone walls. It still grows there now, waiting for the kind of hunger that knows gratitude. If you ever taste it, you'll notice its quiet generosity. It doesn't shout with flavor, it doesn't impress. It simply nourishes. Its leaves carry the taste of simplicity, soft, honest, and grounding. It's the kind of food that doesn't remind you of luxury, but of life itself. For medieval peasants, gathering Fat Hen was an act of both necessity and reverence. To bend down and pick what the world had freely given was to acknowledge something larger, that survival was never just a matter of labor, but of grace. The plant became a quiet teacher of humility, a symbol of the balance between effort and acceptance. Even now, when people speak of wild foods or forgotten greens, Fat Hen often returns to the conversation, a reminder of a time when life was lean, but gratitude was deep. Its lesson endures that not all abundance comes from control. Some of it comes from letting things grow as they will. In the end, Fat Hen was never truly a weed. It was the earth's way of saying, "You will not go hungry." A gift that grew by itself, unasked, unnoticed, but never unneeded. Cram, wild cabbage, the green of the cliffs. Before the fields were tamed into neat rows of cabbage, kale, and broccoli, there was cram, the wild ancestor of them all. It grew where few other plants dared to root, along the edges of rocky cliffs in cracks filled with salt and wind on the thin, harsh soil that faced the sea. It didn't need care, it didn't need favor, it survived through sheer will, a living symbol of endurance. The people who lived near the coasts knew this plant well. They called it cram, wild cabbage, or sometimes simply the green by the rocks. Its leaves were thick and waxy, coloured with a bluish hue that made them almost ghostly against the grey stone. The air around it smelled faintly of salt, and the wind that battered it daily seemed to make it tougher, not weaker. When eaten raw, its leaves were bitter, almost defiant in their taste, as if they refused to please easily. But boiled slowly with patience, they softened into something nourishing and rich. The bitterness faded into warmth, and the coarse texture turned tender, yielding to the fire. For the people who gathered it, especially in the hungry gap between winter and spring, cram was a quiet salvation. It was not the kind of plant that appeared in noble feasts or fine gardens. It was the food of those who had nothing else. Fishermen's wives would climb the cliffs to gather it, holding on to rope or root, filling baskets with the thick green leaves. They would boil them for hours, sometimes with bits of onion or a scrap of salted meat if fortune allowed. More often, the greens were eaten with barley or bread, plain but filling, the taste of survival. The plant asked for nothing. It didn't require tending, watering, or pruning. Once it found a place it liked, it clung there year after year, sending new shoots each spring. Even when storms tore at the coastline, even when frost covered the stones, cram would return, stubborn as the people who depended on it. Its roots held tightly to the rock, finding strength in what seemed barren. In many ways, it was a mirror of those who lived by the sea, hard, quiet, and enduring. The same hands that mended nets and weathered salt would touch its leaves, cutting them clean, washing them in cold water, and bringing them home. The scent of boiled cram became the smell of late winter, a mix of earth, salt, and smoke, marking the transition between hunger and hope. Medieval herbalists noted its properties, though few praised its taste. They said it was good for the stomach, cleansing for the blood, and strong for the constitution. A coarse plant, one monk wrote, yet fit for the humble and for those who must bear hardship. And perhaps that was its truest description, a food not meant to delight, but to sustain, not to impress, but to endure. Children growing up near the coasts often learn to recognize it by its shape, the thick, central stalk, the curled edges of the leaves, the color that seemed to shimmer between green and silver. It became part of their landscape, as natural as the cliffs themselves. When they left for inland towns or cities, they carried the memory of its taste, a flavor that spoke of wind and survival, of meals made with patience and gratitude. Over time, cram's descendants found gentler homes. Farmers began cultivating softer, sweeter versions: cabbages, kale, collards, bred for tenderness and uniformity. These new varieties filled the markets and kitchens of Europe, and the wild cabbage was left behind, retreating again to its cliffs and dunes. Few missed it, yet something of its spirit remained in every cultivated leaf, that quiet defiance, that strength to thrive in poor soil. Today, wild cram still grows where the land meets the sea. You can find it on the chalk cliffs of England, on the stony shores of Brittany, in the cold wind of the North Sea. It doesn't announce itself, it just exists, a green flame against grey rock. Its leaves still taste of salt and earth, still require time to soften, still remind those who try them that food once meant effort, gratitude, and endurance. To eat cram was to remember that life does not always come from abundance. Sometimes it grows from scarcity, from a seed that finds its way into the hardest places and decides to stay. There is a kind of beauty in such resilience. Cram does not bloom for show, nor does it chase comfort. It survives because it must. It gives because it can. And for centuries, it fed those who shared its nature. People who worked quietly, who faced wind and hardship with steady hands, who understood that even the bitterest leaves could hold a kind of grace. The taste of cram was not sweetness, it was truth. Sharp at first, but soft if you stayed long enough. The kind of flavor that humbles you. The kind that teaches you that survival itself can be beautiful. And so, along the cliffs where the waves strike stone, cram still grows, a green heart beating in the cold, untouched by time, still whispering to anyone who bends close enough to listen. Endure. Turnip greens, the leaves above the root. Before the root ever reached the pot, before the turnip grew round and heavy beneath the soil, there were the leaves, tender, bright, and trembling in the cool air of early spring. These were turnip greens, the first sign of renewal after a long winter. Long before the fields ripened with wheat or barley, before the gardens offered beans or cabbage, people gathered these soft green leaves and called them food. In the medieval countryside, life moved to the rhythm of scarcity and patience. Through the cold months, families relied on what they could store: roots, grains, dried herbs. By late winter, those stores would run thin, the fields lay empty, the ground still stiff with frost. And then, when the first light of spring began to loosen the soil, the turnip offered its gift. Before its root fattened, it sent up a crown of tender leaves, a message from the earth that hunger would not last forever. The farmers knew to watch for them. They would walk out early, baskets in hand, their breath still visible in the morning air. They bent low, cutting only the young leaves, small, soft enough to wilt between their fingers. These greens would not keep long, so they were cooked almost immediately, washed in cold water, then dropped into boiling pots of barley or lentils. The scent was sharp, almost peppery. The flavor, a mix of bitterness and warmth, carried the taste of the season itself, rough, honest, and alive. Mixed with grains or mashed with beans, turnip greens made the simplest meal nourishing. They didn't need much else, perhaps a spoon of fat, a slice of bread, or a bit of salt if one could afford it. In some homes they were stewed with oats or millet into a thick, humble porridge. In others, they were boiled with onions and garlic, creating a meal that felt larger than it was. For many, turnip greens were the first fresh thing they had eaten in months. And that mattered. After winter's grey diet of stored roots and salted meat, these leaves were more than food. They were medicine. They revived the blood, brought colour back to pale faces, and restored strength to tired limbs. Herbalists praised them for their iron, their cleansing properties, their ability to wake the humours after the long sleep of cold. In villages across Europe, they became a quiet tradition, the meal that marked the turning of the year. To share a pot of turnip greens in spring was to taste survival, to feel the promise of warmth returning. For centuries, they were a symbol of the season itself, fragile, brief, and essential. Even so, no one thought of them as special. They were common, everyday food, the kind that disappeared from memory as soon as abundance returned. When summer brought beans, peas, and cabbages, the greens faded from the table. By autumn, when the turnip roots were harvested and stored, people spoke only of the root, its sweetness, its weight, its reliability. The leaves were forgotten, cut away and left to wilt in the soil. But for those who remembered hard winters, the memory lingered. In quiet moments, they recalled the taste, that sharp, earthy bite that had once carried them through hunger. Some said the flavor reminded them of gratitude, others said it tasted of humility. The turnip leaf was not a feast, but it was enough. In the monasteries, the brothers who kept gardens wrote of it in their herbals. They called it a humble green of usefulness, noting that its virtue lies not in luxury, but in its timing. They served it often, especially during Lent, when meals were simple and sparse. The monks, bound by vows of moderation, saw in the turnip green a lesson that nourishment does not require abundance, only attention. Turnip greens also had their place in folk medicine. Crushed fresh, they were used to soothe bruises or cleanse wounds. Boiled and cooled, their water was drunk as a tonic to renew the blood. Whether these cures truly worked or not, people believed in them, and sometimes belief itself was enough to heal a weary spirit. Today, few remember the leaf that came before the root. The modern turnip, bred for its roundness and sweetness, grows thick beneath the ground, while its leaves are trimmed away, tossed aside as waste. We eat what looks beautiful and forget what once kept us alive. The old rhythm of gathering, boiling, sharing has been replaced by markets and convenience. But the turnip greens remain in history, quiet and steadfast. They remind us that food was once about resilience, not refinement, about finding nourishment in what the earth freely gave. If you were to taste them again, boiled softly with grains or lentils, you might recognize something ancient in their flavor, a trace of hunger, a trace of hope. Their bitterness, once tempered by time and care, gives way to gentleness, the same way hardship gives way to gratitude. And perhaps that's why these leaves matter still. Because every season begins with something small, something overlooked. The first green after the frost, the first scent of warmth in the air. The turnip greens were never meant to impress. They were meant to keep us alive. And sometimes that is the most sacred purpose of all. Colors, the language of history. There's a quiet moment when the story of Earth turns into the story of light. After talking about soil, roots and crops, it feels natural to drift into color, because color too was born from the ground. The red of clay, the blue of stone, the gold of dust. Long before history had words, it had pigment. The first was ochre. Humans crushed red earth and mixed it with fat or water, painting their hands onto cave walls. These weren't decorations, they were memories, the first way of saying, I was here. Ochre became a bridge between life and death, used in burials, rituals, and art. A mark of presence in a silent world. From there, color followed humanity through time. The Egyptians ground malachite for green and created Egyptian blue, the first artificial pigment from sand and copper. For them, blue was eternal, the color of the Nile and the heavens. Then came vermilion, the red of power. Made from crushed cinnabar, it glowed like fire and was used by emperors and priests. It was beautiful, deadly, and sacred, a reminder that beauty often came with a cost. But no color was more precious than ultramarine, born from lapis lazuli. Its deep blue was rarer than gold, carried across deserts from Afghanistan to Europe. Artists saved it for holy figures, for the robes of Mary and the skies of heaven. Each stroke was both devotion and sacrifice, a piece of the world's riches turned into light. Yellow joined the story too. Lead tin yellows and orpiment shimmered like captured sunlight. On church ceilings and manuscript borders, gold was not paint, it was presence, a symbol of divine radiance. And surrounding all these hues were black and white, the two quiet foundations of vision. Black from soot and bone, white from lead and chalk, together defining form, life and shadow. For thousands of years, color came from the earth itself. Each shade meant labor. Miners grinding stone, monks washing pigment, artists mixing powder by candlelight. Color was geography and devotion, not abundance. Then the 19th century changed everything. In a small London lab, an accident created mauveine, the first synthetic dye. Soon, chemists learned to make blue, green, and red without mines or minerals. Paint could now come from glass bottles instead of mountain veins. The palette of the world exploded: cobalt blue, chrome yellow, emerald green. Painters like Monet and Van Gogh embraced it, filling their canvases with light no one had seen before. Color became democratic, cheap, available, endless. But with that abundance came something new, a quiet exhaustion. When every shade could be made, color lost some of its weight. The sacred blue of heaven became the paint of wallpaper. The red once reserved for kings appeared on every cloth. And yet the story continued, because color has never only been about beauty, it has always been a way of remembering. From red ochre to synthetic purple, each pigment is a record of our hands and our imagination. Ochre was survival, vermilion was power, ultramarine was worship, yellow was light, black and white were truth and shadow. And now the colors we build from light, digital, infinite, weightless, are the reflection of a new age, one where we no longer mine color from the earth, but from imagination itself. In the end, color is how humanity speaks when words fall short. The first pigment was a whisper from a cave wall, the last may be a flicker on a screen. But both say the same thing. We were here, and we saw the world in color. Epilogue. What remains after the night. And now the story quiets. The roots have rested. The colors have faded. What's left is the earth itself, breathing slowly under the dark. From forgotten vegetables to the pigments of time, everything we touched tonight was the same lesson told differently. That life is patient, that beauty takes time, that even what disappears still leaves a trace. The farmers who once dug through frozen soil, the monks who stirred colors in dim light, the painters who ground blue from stone. Each of them, in their own way, tried to keep something alive, a flavor, a hue, a moment that might otherwise be lost. Centuries pass, but that quiet effort remains. It's in the bread we break, the walls we paint, the light we notice before sleep. It's the small, stubborn tenderness of being human. So let the world dim again. Let the air settle. Beneath us, the soil holds everything that came before: roots, color, memory, waiting for another dawn to bring it back. Because nothing ever truly ends. It just turns to earth and waits to begin again.